Good evening,
Um,
everyone. Welcome to another last round segment with the 2MK team. We are once again playing Dead or Alive Last Round. That is DOA 5 on PS4. The game itself is free, and this week, in addition to the standard 6 characters that are free all the time, Helena and Zack are also available to be played for free. This is a US East Coast lobby. Loser stays on. Generally, we'll accept relatively high amounts of lag, lower connection though, so you can try to connect and see what it looks like. Once again, this week we will be covering holds and the timing for that, but we're at that point where most of what we would want to do is covering stuff from previous weeks and seeing how well we can actually execute it. Therefore, I'm going to be saying a lot less this week until or unless unfamiliar characters show up. Maybe I'll repeat some stuff from the ones we saw previously but didn't see for long. But otherwise, you're more likely to get Rune Siren, aka Kanzuki Dynasty, giving some opinions or asking them questions about the flow of the matches.
Hello. Ah, we're back to the ring. My grand weakness is that once I hit a button or start a chain, I never manage to not finish it or keep going. It leaves me very vulnerable to holds.
One of the things we haven't discussed so much is uneven terrain in this game.
Now, I think from something you said in the distant past, that uneven terrain would tend to change your hold levels sometimes, and the levels of your moves. It obviously affects your combo possibilities, but does that tend to be something that happens a lot, or only in extreme cases?
Your hold level is not actually affected by this, although it may make the move whiff in weird ways entirely. It is possible for a move to miss, but when the move hits, it will always be at the same level.
I see. The fact that you're going to manage to hold my longer combos really does make me want to finish less of them.
But that move is a good example of a spacing where the height of a move might change the follow-ups you're able to do.
Now do you understand, my dear?
I haven't actually paid attention to it much, but how many stages tend to have level as a significant part of their effect?
It's like 6, technically.
Okay. I remember at least like the castle had parts. The forest was uneven. And there was like one of the big tower things you could get slanted. It does seem like something you could spend a lot of your time learning in great detail.
Ugh, I find this character a nightmare to hold, especially in this lag.
Why is that? I mean,
Many
lag is
characters in this
obvious.
game have attacks that look like they're one level, and they're not, basically.
Ah.
And Honoka is such a relatively linear character that I expect she has stuff like this. She also has a good set of kicks added in along with everything else she does, so you have to do forward hold instead. So her relatively strong ability to do that can be a real pain for getting your holds right. However, as noted, she's a fairly easy character to keep out because she's linear in certain ways. The spacing she wants to take up are really not that useful for what she's trying to do most of the time. The problem is that for Kasumi, it's hard to pressure Honoka properly. So my best bet would actually be to back off after nearly every knockdown and take advantage of what I mentioned before. She doesn't aim that well, she's relatively linear. It's harder for her to get in on me than it is for me to get in on her by far. So you can see here, using Kasumi's relatively longer range, and the fact that she doesn't generally do that much damage unless you mess up pretty badly, means you have a better chance of it. But it's too laggy for me to decide what to do at a particular point, so I'll have to stay as it is. In other words, basically once she's in, the slowdown style lag makes it a little difficult for me to do the correct counter attack. But that is more or less my fault for not managing to stay away from her more when I did have that advantage, when I did get a knockdown.
I don't have time to play games with you.
By contrast, I really don't want to do that with Helena. I don't really want to knock Helena down for any length of time. And I don't want to let her go once I've done it. Helena is more susceptible to that whole Kasumi delay second hit of combo thing.
I need to pay more attention to what stuff lands me in backstance, because I end up in a weird position sometimes, and it really doesn't help in those cases. Does Helena herself have much potential to, delay combo hits for any profit?
She can do it at least somewhat. But she also doesn't have as much variation in what those hits are, so it tends to be a little bit easier to find what she's going to do next if you really wanted to deal with it.
I see, so really I just end up giving my opponent more reaction time.
But you can use her flow to... Whereas with Kasumi you're delaying the time, with Helena you're generally looking to delay the range somewhat, or to confuse your opponent with your ranges. Because her moves are actually quite long range. At the very tip of the strike, the stagger created also makes it easier to continue in that way. So if they try to recover in certain spaces, it becomes more difficult.
I see.
She's not really a character where you want to beat up the opponent from as close as possible. Since she specializes with punishing so much, being able to recognize which combo you should do next based on where your opponent's likely to stick a button or try to punish you is probably what you're looking for. This is also why uneven terrain tends to matter to her so much, as well as things like bouncing people off walls and so on. Those things can actually break Helena's rhythm more so than anything the opponent does.
Good luck. I don't have
This stage, for example, is actually more difficult for her to play in, because if she gets the knockdowns, well, it doesn't really help anymore.
I see.
Fortunately, you're still in the middle of the stage where it doesn't actually blow up, so...
Isn't there a space right below me on the floor there? A green cross.
The green doesn't blow up.
Oh. Alright.
It might just be that the explosions themselves are off. It can be done. Nope, there.
I see. And there we have one. Well, it doesn't seem like the sort of place most people would want to fight.
You know. Guts is
I guess
important.
there are a lot of ninjas in this game.
There are a lot of ninjas in this game.
Definitely the sort of place ninjas would like to fight.
There are more ninjas in this game than in Ninja Turtles.
I see. Wait, are we counting the opposition?
Yeah, there are definitely actually more ninjas in this game than in Ninja Turtles. Even counting the opposition.
That's impressive.
I think it's only by one though.
a little troublesome. I feel like I don't know how to get in on him very well.
No, I don't know why you're trying.
Should I be letting him come to me then?
It's more so that you have so much time to position perfectly that it seems
I see.
a waste
Oh.
to spend so much energy on, like, you have so much space control. That's a better way to put it.
Alright, that makes sense. I don't necessarily need to be in all the time. I did not get caught in that, clearly. Ooh, that was nice. I'll do more of that.
In fact, a lot of the time, as I noted, against the wall, Elena has trouble because unless she is in that crouching stance against certain characters, she actually has less control of the match relative to her regular fighting style. If you know how to do her good pressure and corner combos, but at the beginning, you probably are not going to get much out of it. So, she isn't necessarily trying to corner most enemies. It doesn't help her a lot. In fact, one of the most important things of Helena's game is recognizing how to pin your opponent to the wall long enough to get them to let you throw them.
I see.
Because her wall throws are quite good.
You get different throws when you're on the wall, or is it just that
Yes.
you have to use particular
You get
ones
different
that are
throws near the wall.
Interesting. I will have to experiment with this. Presuming I can set it up.
Kasumi, on the other hand, for example, escapes from the corner better if she can get the opponent to whiff, because her wall throw is basically this: put her arms on your shoulders and her feet on the wall, and then like push herself spike past you,
I see.
which gets
That
her out
seems
automatically.
quite productive. That seems quite productive.
Well, we do know some of the Tina match, I believe. In fact, I think technically this has been one of the most recent matches the Wolf has played, so might work out. But similarly, you see here, Tina's response to this is use long buttons and don't try all that hard to get in. There's a specific space she tends to get into well that Elliot can't do too much about, and standing there is good. You can already see it shown off quite well. As soon as Space Wolf gets fairly far away, the Tina player stops moving more or less. Not all the time, but enough to know I'm not going in after you, because by the time you get up off whatever, you'll have an advantage in timing. I might mistime this. It's just not a good idea to go straight for it.
I see.
Tina's throws are also good. In fact, she's basically a grappler character, even though she doesn't necessarily land that many of them in standard neutral. But against his zony character like Elliot, who isn't trying to get in on her and doesn't do a lot of moves that he will whiff, landing her throws is difficult. So whenever she gets them, she has to take as much as possible.
Is it that she then tends to be good at grabbing limbs people stick out and sort of whiff punishing the throw? Or is
No,
it
not
mostly
really,
that she
which
needs
is the problem.
steps to get things?
She tends to whiff punish with buttons, and when she throws you, it's usually because she managed to pressure you into not wanting to hit any.
Hmm.
Because she is good at making you not want to hit buttons sometimes.
I challenge you.
So you've now got close quarters problems for Kasumi in a way, but it's not that terrible necessarily. Because the other use that close quarters has for her is that Elliot doesn't have a lot of space to maneuver backward. So he ends up being very buttonsy. But basically, once he's got nowhere to go, you have to understand a whole different set of his game. So let's change that a little bit and move back to more normal play. So this is the point where there's really no point in me moving forward. As I mentioned before, it's easier to just beat Elliot up this way. And if my opponent doesn't know how to attack me, then I don't care. But giving them the impression that you want to keep attacking is often helpful as well.
Will obviously make them less hesitant to do things.
What you saw me do is one of the other tactics you can use for holds. When you are really close to your opponent, you have a weird form of mix-up if you have enough health. When you have enough health and you don't know what to do to opponent on wake up, if you know that said opponent is most likely going to wake up with buttons, but that their combo is something you can easily recognize, then if they've got low enough health, you stand near them and let them hit you so you can get the hold to finish them off.
I see.
This is not
That's something I've
a high level mix-up because you never want to take any damage you don't have to. And it doesn't work well on certain characters who have a lot of variation, but more linear characters, since the opponent has basically very little that they can do out of that situation other than block or try to check you with buttons, or of course go for their own hold, which is a terrible idea when near a wall. After you're knocked down near a wall, your opponent has all of the options and you have too few of them, so you either block or you hit a button, most of the time. Or of course you wait for the throw and try to tech it, but that's usually not the best option either. So as you can see, you tend to wake up with buttons, right? Now, since you can't know what the opponent's button is going to be, you can't hold the first hit. But if you had enough health, you could take a hit, and were good at recognizing their combos and combo chains. Note what I said. By you not attacking and not even blocking, you created the situation where your opponent has landed one hit and that one hit leads into a string, but you didn't get counter hit. You just took that one hit. And it was most likely something quick and not very damaging because you're close to them and they don't have a lot of options. Since most of those strings are relatively easy to hold and not too damaging, also not too terrifying if you're not the one in the disadvantaged spacing position, it's relatively easy. Another thing that helps is that for most characters, their slower moves are slow enough that if you can recognize their wake up, you can block late and end up blocking their later move, but still have enough pressure and, let's call it mix up, to get hit by the quick move. Again, this is really a very... You could call it relatively substandard baiting because if you had better options for knockdown pressure, you'd obviously want to use those. But if you don't know your opponent's knockdown pressure, and you don't feel as if you can manage to get them with a grab or something, then there you go.
Face your fate.
And Pi is back, but this time probably less laggy. You can let me know. Does it look less laggy?
I'm not noticing any lag.
Okay then. Well, there's your first
Well, I'm not quite sure what's going on.
information on throws of that kind. Pi is a very a relatively slow and fluid character. As mentioned before, she's like Janli in that you don't really want to be taking her on head on too much. You more so want her to come at to you. And from there work out what you want to do, but you can't spend too long defending either. She's relatively linear, but she has some good tracking.
I really
On
need
her
more help
lows,
with
which
that.
helps out with the situation quite a lot. Just think of her as another character that you have to sidestep a lot when you don't know if they're coming at you or not, and that would probably help.
Alright.
Similarly, they're more likely to back off and cover a lot of space, so trying to get in on them is more likely going to hurt you than the other way around.
Well seen.
In other words, move to the side. That's basically all you need to understand for her. If you're far enough out that you have the control of the situation, sidestep, do not approach directly.
See, the problem is getting far enough into a position where I can sidestep at all. Obviously can't do it quite too closely to her, otherwise it's just not even going to start to come out and I'm just going to get hit.
Mhm.
So I really have no idea what to do when I'm up particularly close. She seems to have solid advantage there through her momentum.
But it's so much harder for her to get it than most people that it more or less balances itself out.
Okay. Well, don't get hit that way is in fact a valid solution in fighting games.
Listen, you better not disappoint me. I don't have time to play games with you.
Given Helena's strengths, it's most likely that this player will play the same way against you as they did against Cosmos Elliot. You mostly, though, get to whiff punish Tina quite heavily, compared to Elliot, who is like really far back. Just by the type of character she is, she tends to extend herself forward a lot more when she's doing things. It's therefore up to you to recognize what is happening quickly and beat her up for it. Because if you fail, what will normally happen is really simple. She will be approaching. If you don't read her movements in time, the next attack she lands will go into the big hits.
Okay.
As you see her scene there. It's very Zoni managing to keep her out in a particular timing. And since you can't get much damage on Tina by backdashing and punishing from there, she does a decent job as a closing character based purely on that.
She can combo her throws too, apparently. Is there anything I can do about that?
Don't get thrown. The reason you're getting
No.
thrown is again because the way you're watching the opponent is very... The best way to put it is that you're timid about it because you don't know her yet. And it's similar to what we were discussing in Dragon Ball. If you spend too much time thinking about the fact that you are getting hit, you won't notice that they're not doing that much damage. Castina doesn't actually do that much damage until she throws you. So if you can keep her from ever getting to do that, you don't actually care. When you are close to her, for example, at the moment, your tendency is to hit more buttons so that she has to keep quiet and not you. But this isn't really helpful to you. Once you've hit her a couple times, there's no real reason to hit more buttons because she doesn't have advantage anymore.
Alright. So what do I want to do then? Backdash or evade?
Nothing.
I expect to get thrown in that case.
But if you hit her, she shouldn't be close enough. Her throws are not long range.
Oh.
The assumption that they are is probably the part of her that's scaring you.
Possibly. Alright then. I see. Alright then, that makes sense.
It's always very dangerous to go into fighting games with the assumption, the unchecked assumption, that your opponent's character is strong. A new fighting game is a terrible place when you do that to yourself. Always assume that your opponent is not, in fact, able to do everything all the time however they want, and from there, see what you can use to check their advances.
Okay.
Sure, you may lose, but that's why it's loser stays on lobby, so you can learn things. Winning is for people who know a lot about what they're doing. When you don't know what you're doing, managing to win might be bad for you. You might learn less. Especially if you win by mashing buttons that your opponent wasn't expecting.
I have had that experience.
I'm ready to fight. I don't have
Momichi is basically a slow Kasumi.
Presumably she hits harder in trade?
She's Fire Kasumi.
I see. That did so little damage. I threw her off a building. Everything.
I don't know what you're expecting from superhuman ninjas. She was falling. Fall damage means nothing.
Oh, right. Fair, fair. Ninjas get immunity to fall damage as like a basic trait.
But you've got the same problem with her as you have with Kasumi. On your knockdowns, you're staying a little too close. There's no benefit to it. Especially since she has much better damage off of basically anything she does than Kasumi has, and slightly longer range on her hands.
Alright then. Let's see if I can do something about that.
But she's definitely making you flustered in that every time she knocks you down, you basically wake up with buttons. Which is not really necessary. I mean, you don't do it against Kasumi, it's not really helpful there either.
Alright. Not to mention I just hit too many buttons overall.
I guess I've been getting stronger.
I'm indeed flustered. Not sure what that's about.
Me neither.
Says I'm awaiting reply, awaiting reply.
Ah, there we go. It had a minor hiccup in terms of netcode, apparently.
Alright. Well, now I get the Kasumi version of the match.
The difference is that I actually generally won't pressure you in that same situation most of the time. Not because it won't work, but because it would work. Where's that stage gone?
Which one are you looking for?
Oh, well, whatever. The one on top of the bright one on top of the rig where Tina and Elliot were fighting.
Avoid this fight.
Either way,
Time to play games with you.
explosions.
See the red barrels in the background.
This is what I'm talking about. I have basically decided every time I knock you down, I backstep a little bit, and then go for the next attack after that. Because you
I
wake
see.
up with
You're basically-
buttons, I will get away with it because either I will block, or you'll whiff something in front of my face and I'll get a combo. And sometimes you'll whiff some really slow things that I can even just block and then punish them. It's not that you should never wake up with buttons in this game. It's more so that you tend to make those decisions. It's similar to getting shimmied in Street Fighter. You make those decisions based on where I am at the moment of your wake up, instead of delaying at all. And that's kind of dangerous. It's better in this sort of game to give yourself at least a little time after getting up to feel the situation out some more. After all, if your opponent was going to lunge for you, you really could just hold them if you could see the move coming, so it wouldn't matter that much. You're not absolutely sure that you're going to have to take pressure from them.
I suppose. Part of that is perhaps a little bit then that I need to get slightly more used to actually being able to hold people, which might involve gaining the skill of actually being able to hold people.
But again, it's more so that it's still better no matter what to just not hit anything immediately. Especially with a character whose main goal is to whiff punish things and punish things from close.
I don't have time to play games with you.
I'm used to, I think, possibly still from Street Fighter, wanting to hit buttons to push people out after waking up.
That totally would work, but one, you're not waking up with the buttons that would do that, and two, if people backdashed on your wake up in Street Fighter, the same thing would happen. Your main confusion is more so that it's not happening here.
Walking down stance.
So this Ayane basically has the same approach, just move away from you very slightly whenever you are on wake up. And manipulate your expectations that way.
I see. There I am trying to hold in neutral. Even if I know what's coming and when, that doesn't necessarily work out so well.
Not until you have that much skill now. A large part of this game is understanding what your opponent is probably going to want to wake up with based on where exactly you are, and effectively baiting that out as well as you can.
I see.
I mean, it is very dangerous to just wake up with buttons in this game.
have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Thought I moved forward a little bit. I wanted to actually probably move backwards instead.
Get ready, fight!
Another highly useful thing, for example, is that if you stand at exactly the range where your opponent is likely to wake up with a kick, it doesn't really matter what kick, and you do the kick hold, most of the time, if you time it just right, you don't get hit at all. Either you will hold them or they will whiff because they didn't do a kick.
I see. Because you're at the right range, you don't really have a choice in the matter.
Now, obviously this does not apply to every character. Some characters have kicks that have long strings and would be able to go into things from there, and some characters that have punches that lead into kick strings and would therefore be still helpful. But a lot of the time this will work, and your opponent will just realize, oh, you're standing too far away to pressure or hurt me anyway, so I'll just leave it and wake up normally.
Get ready, fight!
But I suppose the question that I would have to worry about is figuring out what precise range I want to stand at for that.
Get ready, fight!
I don't know what to do for that punch string that I just ended with. It's obviously very minus on hit, but that would imply to me that something probably comes out of it. But I don't
Not
really
necessarily.
know what.
Not necessarily.
What would it be for?
Some things in this game are just bonus damage if you're near the wall or for knockdowns or certain things like that. Not many, but there are a few combos where the is minus on hit and that's just it. Also, of course, if you expect your opponent to do something, being minus on hit doesn't matter because you could just hold them.
Ah, right.
Let the red rose of blood
I see.
come forth. Face your fate.
Get ready, fight!
So at that point you're just basically playing Kareen with counter.
Yes, and the counter's a little bit harder in terms of having to figure out what they're going to hit, not just when.
Similarly, you get a little bit of a mix up into the throw because it's minus on hit.
How does that one work?
In that you just delay the throw very slightly. You can't throw people while they're in block stun, but if the lock stun doesn't happen, who cares?
Was there anything she could have done for me to me from that range?
Not aware of anything.
Expecting me to chase, I suppose, but with that much life lead. Almost as if she knows me.
Well, they have been watching you for like 6 rounds.
Fair point. So she dashes in on Wake Up and throws as, or sorry, Startup, opening gambits. Is there anything I can do about that? I
Just
suppose
hit
I can
buttons.
attack it.
You could just hit buttons. This is standard play after all. Every game is like this. Your main problem in these games tends to be a lack of confidence in your buttons, as you remember. Either the range, or the type, or what.
I see.
So obviously if you don't
That
have a
is-
good idea of what button to hit, or there's that, there's obviously, as you mentioned, teching it. But a lot of this is button unfamiliarity or not trusting yours enough.
Yes, I have a little trouble in this game, particularly learning them simply because I find myself ending up in weird stances, either as a result of things or whatever reason, and then the buttons change in what they can do and what I have available. Although my Street Fighter habit of holding back for all of my buttons probably isn't helpful.
But in the end, yes, it's almost completely about patience and understanding of your own character's spacing.
The taste of victory.
Yes, there was really not much she could do from that positioning. And she didn't have an answer to my whatever you call that particular kick.
That is a gutsy matchup.
What is it?
I said that is a gutsy matchup.
Why?
Phase 4 is just linear enough that Rachel gets a lot of advantage out of certain things.
Come and fight.
It's one of the few matches in this game where I would be willing to say, just play Kasumi. Like, even if you were a Phase 4 veteran, if you thought your opponent was good at Rachel, regardless of anything else, it would be usually better to just play Kasumi.
I see. Phase 4 is like a Kasumi clone or something, right?
Mhm. She does. It's hard to explain why she is particularly better at. So you just have to watch, and I'll try to explain it as we go, maybe.
Oh.
Because that move is the same, that move is more or less the same. She's just very slightly different, but the ways in which she's different don't really help against Rachel so much. A good way to explain it would be, she does all her approaches slightly faster, so you're a little less likely to get punished for it. But Rachel is so good at putting you so far away, it literally doesn't matter most of the time. Approaching is no longer a bonus. Once you're close and you're dealing damage, it's basically the same damage and the same moves. So if you can't get in better by playing her... Oh, she's basically... Eventually I suppose they realize, half the people who play this game play Kasumi as this weird footsie character, and half of the people who play her play Rushdown. And we can't make both those people happy with the balance, so let's just make a whole new character to play Rushdown Kasumi.
I see.
Which doesn't help you against Rachel most of the time at all.
How hard would it be for a Phase 4 player to switch to Kasumi? I assume
It's
they're
not that.
somewhat
For this matchup, it'd basically be without effort. They're really almost the same character, seriously.
I see.
The level at which you understand the difference in them is really, really nuanced and very little else. At least at the mid-levels. At the mid-levels, it would be hard to look at these characters and even understand what difference they have, except someone decided, oh, they have different combos, huh, cool. That's about it. But again, she lunges more when she just strikes, meaning you can hit from further, and you can combo off some of those hits better. She does less damage as a whole, I think, but it's still not terrible. Still can't really say that it's helping in this matchup, but there's a moment where it helped. Kasumi, I'm pretty sure would have gotten hit there, would not have made that in time. But it looks like we actually get to see it demonstrated. Maybe? Maybe not. Which might actually be related to the same thing. If you see your opponent choose Phase 4 and you're picking Rachel, you go, okay, I'll play this. If you see them pick Kasumi, you might not want to play it as much.
I can't avoid this fight. Oh dear.
Get ready, fight!
The fortunate thing about this matchup is, for Marie Rose that is, she has a good enough control of the mid-range that you can't just hit buttons as Kasumi. You have to fake out some stuff, pay some attention in some spaces that you don't normally have to. As you can see there, she strikes relatively quickly right in front of her, and most of her hitboxes cover a lot of that space, so Kasumi can't do as she likes. So, the easier way to do this, I'm about to demonstrate as best I can. Note the damage being done. The easier way to do this is to do little nothing. To play Kasumi in that style that I mentioned before. Marie Rose has some relatively committed moves in that specific situation. Meaning you can play it out from further away. But you do have to block a lot of things. And you can't make certain approaches at all. For example, that was with punish on my longest kick with just punch. Really good in terms of overall flow. But I went for a punch that I shouldn't have gone for. And that one was just playing out a little bit too far. But overall, you can see the difference between the characters in that way. Phase 4 goes forward. Kasumi kind of goes up-ish. And it can make it harder for the opponent to deal with that sort of thing.
Up, like, flying, sort of up?
More so. She has more. Her leaping moves and flying moves are slightly delayed, and as a result it's actually slightly more effective because the opponent is likely to hit the button too early and get whiff punished by the actual attack. This happens for a lot of her ranges actually, because as I mentioned, she can delay these strikes of regular hits on the ground too. So I can like stick out her first kick, you assume the second kick is coming and go get ready to hit a button, and I just delay the second kick really long. Just to prevent the interactions from working in the standard way. Looks like the lag reset itself maybe a bit. Oh, no, there it is again. Now the wolf knows this matchup somewhat from facing Amara, but it's not necessarily going to help in either this lag situation or given the playstyle of this Rachel, which is actually really good. They're willing to block at a spacing that you could get around them if you really tried to do a lot of repositioning, but they're also confident in being able to handle you with her buttons on your approach regardless of where you decided to try to get to. That level of confidence is really useful on this character because it means she can just not move for super long periods of time. You see it right there. The willingness to just go, okay, I don't care if you reposition, I'm not going to try to catch you. I'm just going to stand here and be tall and intimidating.
And good luck coming and hurting her.
Not too bad.
But it looks like you've got a little bit more lag on that side than usual today. However, these two might be, hopefully, on the same side of me internet-wise.
Yeah, we don't get the little flags in this game like Street Fighter has.
No, they're there.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't see them.
Check more so the middle of the screen.
Oh, okay.
They're harder to notice because they're smaller, obviously, but they're there.
Alright.
So they are both like one bar to me at the moment. And it, as a result, shows up red. But hopefully that means that they're close to each other and can have a good match. And if not, then I guess it will be a complete slog. I'm going with complete slog.
This is not promising.
Get ready, fight!
It's hard
Yeah,
to
that
say
looks a
now.
little difficult.
Nope, complete slog.
Yep.
But this is another slightly useful thing, even though if it's probably really annoying to the players. Watch Honoka's moves very slowly because the watch in this game will also cause the moves themselves to slow down. It's not the best, but if you're not actually playing, not actually trying to figure out what's going on so that you can counter it, you can more easily spend time watching all of her moves and seeing what they actually are. And people are more likely to hit other stranger moves in lag, so you get to look at those too. Sometimes I feel like she's like someone's created character.
Why so?
She has so many pieces of other people's styles and moves that it often gives me the impression that like they just decided, let's take all these moves with these properties from these characters and slap them together and see what we get. I'm totally the sort of person who would build a 3D fighting game character by making like a move randomizer and sticking them all things together. See what you get. And if she turned out to be awesome, then yay.
I would just need to add 1 or 2 things to cover the gaps and you're good to go. Especially, I suppose, if your moves are in any way categorized in the game.
It's basically Absolver style development. But that kick, for example, is Janli's kick. I'm pretty sure that that is like one of Kasumi's moves, but it's normally not actually an attack. That's another Kasumi move, although I think more characters have that particular spinning axe kick thing. So it's not as if I'm saying that the moves in this game are unique to given characters, but they are kind of iconic in certain ways. And to have them all on her would imply that she has studied everyone else in the UA universe and learned to fight with all their moves put together. A little odd.
Well, I suppose there are people who might try to do that.
But on the other hand, she's like 5'4" and is using base's bear hug attack. So I'm a little suspicious.
I suppose.
But yes, hopefully it will be less of an unbearable slog for whoever comes after them.
Yes, this is not quite what I would want to fight in.
But it is also true that because she has moves like that, the cohesion's not quite there. She's the sort of character you play when you've learned to play every other character and decided, okay, let's try to put all that together.
I'm so sorry. Can you stand up?
She's also, by my reasoning, a weirdo. But there, see? There's, like, next to the LR.
Ah, sure. I was thinking of the geography flags. Like
Oh, that.
country flags. Just so I can satisfy my curiosity as to how their internet is configured or something.
Well, we also discussed this match quite a bit last week. It's likely to be more of the same.
No way.
I challenge you. Get ready, fight!
So it looks once again as if the internet is not holding out on that side today. But which technically means we get to see Ayane moves in slow motion.
Hers are a little easier for me to follow. Possibly because they're more similar or something?
I'm actually surprised to hear that. Ayana has a lot of deceptive extra movement in her attacks. So at the startup of them, for the most part, they can look quite the same.
Ah. Well, it may
Making
be
her-
that I'm only recognizing the later portions.
She's a very difficult character to do things on reaction against very quickly. Fortunately, a lot of her moves have relatively long execution times, and if you can keep her out, as mentioned before, you do get to like throw her somewhat, maybe counter some stuff, but I definitely don't feel as if in general you get to see that much. But if you watch just the beginning of her movements, I think you might find the same thing happening.
Alright, I'll try it. She seems to do everything, like, behind her first. It seems like it's hard because it's hard to tell what side of her she's turning around on, which then results in different moves.
Yeah, it's also troublesome. But with that win, it's probable that most of the lag is over.
I'll defeat anyone.
Though I guess we'll see.
We can certainly hope.
Oh, it's you that's up next, so I guess it is. Technically speaking, anyway.
Face your fate. No way.
Get ready, fight!
Trying to hold out of that with medium punch hold without much luck.
Get ready, fight!
Why was I failing the throw?
Remember that crouching throws and standing throws are different things.
I thought that it was standing. I'm pretty sure I did a standing throw.
And I'm pretty sure your opponent crouched in that moment.
Deceptive ninjas.
Get ready, fight!
Generally remember that throws should more or less be treated as a punish for your opponent going to particular moves. Normally they can't manage to crouch in time after a strike to get away from the throw then.
Alright. Well, I'm on the wall, so I was trying to see what I can get out of that.
Aha.
The taste of victory.
So we are back to the face-off of sisters once again. Where's my aircraft carrier gone? Oh, this was what stage I was looking for. That's weird. Those two aren't directly connected, are they?
I am ready.
Oh well.
Go away.
So we're back to how do I get to beat you up even though you do much more damage and I have to poke at you forever.
Get ready, fight!
This is actually part of the reason why I built up that really, really terrible habit of attacking in certain situations when I should just gain my advantage and keep it. As I noted before, my brother is an Ayane player. Well, my brother doesn't like fighting games, so he'd lose interest if I were playing to win too much fairly easily. So you get this situation where I really shouldn't be attacking. I really have gotten to the point where the way to win this match is to not go in. But my brother would eventually just stop playing if I played like that, so I had to learn to fight Ayane under that circumstance.
That sounds like something that could be difficult to decondition, especially if you played with him a lot over your lifetime.
Fortunately, he does not mind being thrown, so I get to think about that as part of the approach, get in situation a lot more.
Get ready, fight!
So yeah, even though I shouldn't, I'm probably going to keep going in.
How did you change habits like that? If you've built up something of that sort, What
I
do you do
don't.
about it?
I don't change nothing.
Just let it be.
I just adapted a way to get better at the thing in question. If I couldn't
see.
figure out how to make myself stop hitting buttons on Kasumi, I would just decide, well, fine, I'll just learn how to hit better buttons.
I suppose that makes sense.
What I will note is that my brother also doesn't have... He's not really a turtle in these games, so he will try to challenge it. And because he will try to challenge it, I had a lot of opportunity to learn that. Those exact spacings where this button Kasumi has beats this button Ayane has, and so on. He did definitely block, and most of the time when you see me go for things like Kasumi's double illusion turn flip kick, I have no idea what that's called, is because that's the range I would expect blocking to happen. But if I get blocked at that range, Ayane doesn't have a lot of good punishes. Similarly, there's a lot of memorization of that goes on in fighting games over a long time between two players that know each other well. You know that your opponent is probably not going to punish it or will stay in a position where you can attack them and know that they will be out of range to punish you afterwards. So, this is helpful in building up that sort of muscle memory. Does our wall throw work here? Apparently it does. Not exactly high on the realism sometimes. And opponent is awake.
Get ready, fight!
Alright, for 1 round handicap.
But as you see here, Ayane has a lot of evasive buttons that take her out of the way of certain things. So you can't just go in with Kasumi and decide, okay, I'm just going to hit now, because she will actually get out of the way of things and not get hit at all.
Phase 4 can do a bit more of that.
I'd say she does a little bit more, but the other main thing is that because her lunges are better, whereas Ayane can counterattack Kasumi on the approach, it's harder to counterattack phase 4 on the approach. So Ayane then has to be a little more proactive, which can be risky. Ooh.
Match is decided.
Oh.
I don't know very much about Zack other than that he has his own island, apparently.
Zack is the best. He's impossible to understand as a person, though. He's like if someone decided to put Dennis Rodman in a fighting game. He's literally if someone decided to put Dennis Rodman in a fighting game. It's awesome in its own way. That's probably good. Let's leave it that way for now.
Alright.
Unofficial US ambassador to North Korea.
What? What?
Basketball player, good friend of Kim Jong-un. No?
Okay.
Not ringing a bell? Okay.
I'm aware that this person exists, but I don't. It doesn't add any information to my.
I don't see why you have... No, I'm not, like, exaggerating. That he's a parody of Dennis Rodman. Like, you can look at Zack, and you're looking at Dennis Rodman.
Okay.
If Dennis Rodman knew Muay Thai... I don't actually know if Dennis Rodman knows Muay Thai. He might. He's a very accomplished individual. Anyways, back to the actual working out how the match is supposed to go.
Right. sometimes distractions.
Zac does not have a whole ton of range on his less linear normals. He has super linear normals in certain cases, and he has relatively stubby range and not much heavy approach on the others. He is still a good Mutai style character though. And you can see here if they basically decided, okay fine, you are going to fight me that way, so I'm going to use my range. Which is probably a good response to have to a Honoka playing this particular way. As the opponent has now decided, okay, I'm going to stand even further away from you and try moves from there. Not a terrible plan on either side. The main thing that you would want to change if you were as the Zac player is to reposition more, because it gives... Zac is good at giving players the idea that they can close in on him and then breaking that expectation fairly heavily.
Aha. So this is going to be hard.
Depends on if they play Zac.
Indeed. Alright then, phase 4.
Helena has more trouble with phase 4 than with Kasumi, for sure. Because the whiff punish is harder as a generality, and the punishes are harder too. Phase 4 spends more time going into the air and getting a decent amount of knockback and space off the move she does. But she's not different from Kasumi in that regard. Be ready to high counter. But the difference is that with Kasumi you would be high countering in neutral, which is what you're not supposed to do anyway. With phase 4 you actually get to learn some of it, because you can high counter in strings and you can high counter when she's approaching in other ways. Like when you see her hit one button and you expect another button to follow, it's the same as Kasumi in that regard, but she's even more likely to be using highs.
Alright.
And when she isn't, the damage that will come is not really that concerning.
She can just keep that going, huh?
Well, that's what the character's for. Similarly, after the first two quick whiffs, she's not like Kasumi, she's not all that creative, relatively speaking. So you can expect that you actually can hold her mid, I believe, when that sort of thing is going on.
Let's see.
So if you see punches, just hold mid and hope it works.
Okay.
Helena does not have to worry about the kicks in neutral, because since phase 4 is not as good at delaying them, Helena tends to be able to duck under them and finish out the attack. So you can see here, you get to do more things relatively safely, because it's easier to get out of her way than it is to attack. That linearity also means that if your opponent is spaced incorrectly on their approach buttons, she's actually easier to whiff punish than Kasumi, because there's no chance of a move that will matter coming up.
I have to remember enough of that to write it down.
fight this fight.
Get ready, fight!
That's a good example of it, actually. You can't be sure that I'm going to do the second hit of that, for example. Kasumi can do that, or she can actually flip over your head at that point, which is a little hard to execute timing-wise, but she can do it. I don't believe FaZe has that particular ability. She can also do that. I can't say for sure. I'm just fairly sure that FaZe doesn't have all of them. Constant feeling of uncertainty when she's in front of you is basically how Kasumi works as a character. So, giving her moves that make that stronger would make her weaker in terms of actual offense, which is why you have Phase 4. At least that's my opinion as a game designer. Now, one thing that Kasumi gained in this game that I don't remember her having before is a lot of stuff based on her forward. I tend to call that heavy punch, even though it really shouldn't be called that. The punch plus kick button, which is, I believe, set to R1 for me and probably for you as well. She now has a lot of Hake style stunning strikes with that button. They don't necessarily work that well in neutral, but they're decent to keep your opponent from moving once you've gotten the combo started. They're not necessarily good in terms of the combo. They cause some weird scaling and don't let her reposition all that well, but if your main aim is to frustrate your opponent and keep them from moving for as long as possible, you can psychologically come out on top quite a lot. The main fault in the move is that it pushes the opponent back too far to do a lot of her better stuff. And the way the recovery tends to work out means that if you don't follow it, they are at advantage. But if you're intimidating enough to make them not want to hit buttons and then hit them with that, since she has like 2 or 3 different versions of it, it's hard to remember to do certain things. It looks like you got the internet all fixed up. As a fictional ninjutsu style goes, this game manages fairly well. Since they seem to have managed to take a particular concept and work it out from there. And you don't have to worry about the effectiveness of the physical fighting style in a real world if you're making a fighting game. Otherwise we wouldn't have Menat.
Yeah. Imagine that being a little hard in real life.
You gotta fight better than that. I don't have time to play games with you.
I challenge you.
Get ready, fight!
I think this game is probably the one that would teach you patience.
Well, then I need to play a lot more of it.
Get ready, fight!
I can't say 3D fighters in general because I'm sure Tekken is a really great game, but I can't ever, like, after playing this one I never feel like playing Tekken. This has nothing to do with any specific like or dislike of the concept of the game or how the game plays as a whole. There's nothing I think is bad about Tekken specifically. It's just that I never feel like playing it.
Kind of an unfortunate situation to be in when one is producing something.
But we are seeing a couple more holds this week. And of course it always starts off with very well-known moves, strings or combos you've seen a while. That is after all the point.
So I always find myself having trouble recognizing things and processing them in time to even start to put holds into my game. Although I'm certainly seeing myself get held a little bit more. I sort of wonder if that's a personal weakness or if there's some sort of technique I need to apply to it.
Different people actually have a different block size for events that happen. I was discussing this with Mara the other day that her block size for understanding games is much larger than most players that she faces, so she'll like see someone jump in, then do another hit after the jump in, and she needs to parry the third hit, but because to her it's one block, by the time she's recognized that the second hit has happened, the third hit has already happened. It's probably not, I didn't probably like explain it all that well, but the idea that the simple question is, do you see a combo of 5 moves as 3 separate short combos? Or do you see it as one big thing, and you're just focusing on what happens at the end?
I tend to more so struggle to see it as 3 short combos. Or rather, I struggle to recognize the interconnect points because I suppose I'm not used to them being separate so that I can learn to track them separately or something like that.
Right, for some people,
They're all sort of
they're actually just like that from the beginning. They don't ever see... It also helps if you like play characters and do shorter combos. Or half do your combos. Those sorts of things help you understand how it really is flowing and where you could go. Helena tends to be a little bit...
that you're trying to figure
Yeah,
out this
somewhat
about?
play the character you're trying to understand. Helena is a
I can
little bit
imagine that helps.
canned though. She tends to do, because she has such clean spacing, she tends to have more or less one good combo at every spacing, and they just gave it to her automatically because that would be dumb to have a character who stands at space A, you land the hit, and then your combo doesn't work at space A. That would just be terrible. So, for the most part, Helena has like one or two combos that work at all her better ranges, and anything else tends to be suboptimal. So she's not really a character where you care about this too much. But in terms of other
Well, don't you
people,
have to worry about it?
yeah.
Don't you have to worry about it for holds?
Mm, not really, because again, while she does whiff punish people and that can sometimes lead to her being held easily, she also has a lot stronger stagger on some of her attacks. And once you've gotten the opponent to stagger level, hold becomes difficult. When you see critical stun come up, I'm pretty sure you cannot generally hold anymore. There's counter strike and critical stun, which are two separate things. One is a staggering effect, and one is just, oh, I have more stuff now.
Uh-huh.
More frame data advantage, that is.
Out of my way.
Okay. I see. Sorry, I think I interrupted you as well.
But as demonstration of what we were discussing before... Ah, there's my stage. The idea in those situations is always, well, my opponent is good at stopping me from going in, so I must get better at going in. But you can already see it here what I was talking about. She doesn't actually even have to do the kick. Meaning that if your response to the kick is like, oh, I know what button to hit here that will stop your kick, I can just not do the kick anymore. I can go completely over your head, I can stop and then hit something else. She's just that sort of character. So, this is actually true for a lot of my characters as a whole. Having that response of people telling you, well, you should stop going in so much, makes sense, except that my characters are built to go in so many varied and creative ways that you might really be better off focusing on how to go in more and getting more creative about it. The key with Kasumi tends to be accuracy. At the end of the day, don't miss. Missing is your problem.
Do you end up getting whiff punished badly in those situations then?
It's much easier to do than most characters because she has that whole long delay. If you miss, especially after delaying a move, or you delay a move and as a result your opponent moves out of the strike zone, not only did they expect that move, when they don't get hit, they don't have to think about it. This is actually true in all fighting games with evasive hitbox characters, and it's not something that people think about very much when they're playing. Let's assume that Kasumi does one high kick at someone, and they crouch. If they were in the correct position, if they expected something else, they have to delay the strike only very little. Because if they were standing and had blocked the hit, then whatever their strike is won't come out. It's effectively option selecting out of your own block. You just hit the button because if I ducked this move, if I guessed correctly what move was coming and I ducked it, I can hit this button for free. And if I didn't duck it, then the button won't come out because I was blocking.
I see.
Ayane has a lot of stuff like this too. And I mean a lot, more than Kasumi technically. Situations where you can get out of the way of her stuff and then just hit the button that would deal with it afterwards. So Ayane players have to be very careful about it. But she has much better strike zones than Kasumi for a lot of things, meaning that it's harder to make her whiff in the first place, but if you do, she tends to be in even more trouble.
Whoever stored all of these nice jars out in this room made a horrible mistake.
Gotta store jars somewhere.
Build them a closet so people go through it less. Well, I suppose then they just throw themselves through the wall.
I don't know what you're talking about. This is clearly a ninja village. There's no chance at all of these spaces surviving.
Of what now?
There's no chance at all of vases surviving in a ninja village.
I suppose. But then at that point, why make them other than for target practice? Well, I suppose I answered my question.
Learning to work with your hands and make pottery is good. Very calming.
I suppose.
Get ready, fight!
As mentioned last time, she's not the easiest character to zone from full spacing. But we already discussed which of Elliot's tools are required for the job, so
Great match.
Alright. See if I can manage to hold something this time.
Ayane is one of those characters in this game with the closest possible timing to regular jump-in style attacks that you're used to. Even when she's not jumping.
I see.
In return for this, she gets some really good ranges that you can't do anything about. So basically, you have to learn to hold against certain things Ayane does, because there's simply no button that most players or characters have that will deal with it. Basically,
Stuff, perhaps.
the equivalent of Akuma, a character who you could try to anti-air them with like regular buttons, but you have no idea what will happen to you if you try that. That, for example, worked out and that one didn't.
The timing for the holds is going to be hard if I try to do it against the approaches in that way.
This is also because you have a very strong twitch reaction. And as noted, Ayane's moves are hard to tell apart when she starts. You have to let Ayane do something and give her enough time to get into range for the strike to actually get into your hold. If you don't, then normally you've held too early and she'll hit you instead. So it requires a lot of patience again.
That is probably a large part of the problem. But then I end up trying to twitch with buttons at the same timing, and that works even worse. That... Alright then. I'm not ready for that. I catch myself trying to back hold fix.
After image is a deadly and problematic. There you go.
Got it.
After image is terrible in this game because holds are the sort of thing that as soon as you hit them, you think your opponent will keep on attacking because you whiffed a hold. But a lot of the time, they not only don't, the best thing to do after you've seen your opponent to whiff a hold, as soon as you've recognized that's happened, is go for throw.
Well, that's a bit of a problem for anyone who repeats their hold button.
You actually take extra damage if you were going for a hold and get thrown.
Ah.
In fact, this game has a full rock, paper, scissors system based on that, obviously. The more damage you were trying to do with your button when you got held, the higher the damage of the hold. Similarly, if you were going for throw and got hit because your opponent went for the strike, you take extra damage. And finally, if you went for the hold and got thrown, you take extra damage for that too. It specifically tells you actually there's counters, which is your opponent went for something and you were just faster but you went for the same thing. And high counter, which is not only did you move faster or anticipate that, you also hit the thing that beat the thing that they were doing. And in some cases, that is a lot of damage. To the point of Kasumi having one throw that used to do like 33% damage if you were trying to hold at the time.
I see. That's terrifying.
Alright, as you can see here basically, Phase 4 is not really good at hurting you, but she's good at hitting you for very long periods, which tends to frustrate people. She actually has moves that are effectively multi-strike combos, as in you can't hold them because it's actually functionally all one move. Like that kick, I'm pretty sure you can't hold out of. They call it a combo, but it's certainly not the type you can poke at. better way to deal with her is just go for lows whenever she's approaching. Once she's stuck to you though, it's a little bit harder and you probably have to, yes, do with that. Stay down longer so that by the time the player decides to go for something, they'll whiff into your attack rather than getting you on your wake up. A slightly delayed side roll is also useful, but Phase 4 actually, despite being linear, has a few decent ways of handling the side roll, so it's something you use less than the other wake up options. As noted there, since she has relatively good tracking on that multi-strike, it can be a little harder to stay out of her way altogether. But we are coming to the end of this stream. Tonight there will definitely be Street Fighter V content on Traveling Controller, New England FGC, and we will be hosting that today for sure.
I can't avoid this fight.
The lobby itself is not necessarily going to close. But we will definitely stop streaming it. You can actually see it here. Basically, Kasumi can't really do anything about Ayane if Ayane wants to fight from really far away, except hold. Anything you do is a large anticipation of stuff. Fortunately, Ayane is, as I mentioned, basically the same as Kasumi in that you just hold high. Whenever you're at that long range where you feel uncomfortable, hold high and you're probably fine. One thing I did learn from all that time playing my brother was basically to treat throw as a button in a combo. You just tap it in between other things in case your opponent didn't want to deal with you in a particular way.
Does it require much from them when you do that? Or does it just tend to work if they're...
Because they tend to be blocking at a specific spacing and her timing is very weird.
I see.
Don't make me laugh.
And with that, we'll consider that the end of our stream. Join us next week for Mishmashing Lounge content, Street Fighter V on Monday. The Tuesday train, our Guilty Gear Xrd Lounge on Tuesday. Wednesday for Sandbag Casuals in Street Fighter V. And Thursday for Kame House, our Dragon Ball Fighters lobby. Next week we will not be having DOA on Friday. We will be looking at the various type of bot inputs we have for Dragon Ball Fighters and how to utilize that. Overall, therefore, this has been Rillian for Team 2MK along with Kansuki Dynasty. Have a good night, everyone, and enjoy your training. If you want to watch some Street Fighter action from New England FGC, stick around. We will be hosting the Traveling Controller stream, or head on over there to watch it directly.